after almost 1.5 years. So maybe we can first introduce our work and why we are doing it here. No? Well,
yes.
Would you like to?
Yeah, actually, first of all, I want to point out the fact that you're sitting on a purple chair and I'm sitting on a green chair. So I wonder if there is like a hidden kind of a symbolism.
Yeah,
in
of course, you are the
I'm
specialist.
I'm on the Islamic side and you're on the Byzantine side.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. So I can start say a few words about myself. I actually also belong to both worlds. My dissertation was on the rise of Islam from a Byzantine point of view. It was published almost 10 years ago in Routledge as Eastern Rome and the Rise of Islam. So this is really the core area of what I have been doing work on. But I'm working in Istanbul now for the Swedish Research Institute since 8 years. And inevitably I have also become interested in other histories than the Byzantine one. And a few years ago, I edited together with a colleague in Austria a volume called Narrated Empires, which was mainly focusing on the late Ottoman and Habsburg empires and the way in which they represented themselves as pluralistic orders. But in that way also, I think I can say I'm generally focused and interested in the concept of empire throughout history and how empires have defined themselves and how they have been commemorated. So that, of course, brings us very much into today's topic, because I feel that there is especially much in the whole, both in the science fiction genre and in general in speculative fiction from the 1950s onwards, that where you see the kind of tropes recurring all the time about empires that I find fascinating. I can say a few words also about what most specifically brought me into this. I took part, this was probably 6-7 years ago, a colleague of mine at that time in Uppsala, Anna Linden Weller, also known as Arkady Martin.
Yeah. In the sci-fi community,
yes,
she's known as Arkady Martin.
Yes.
Yeah.
But she organized a fascinating conference at the time where she brought together sci-fi and fantasy authors about speculative empires. And at that time, I was presenting more specifically a paper on 2 novels, which, I mean, with a little bit of a stretch, you could say that they fit there because they have to do with contrafactic history, but in very different ways. One was Harry Turtledove's series on Agent of Byzantium, and the second one was Jean d'Ormeson's Glory of the Empire, and I hope we can return to them in today's talk. But
and I have just completed my dissertation, and it is on late Byzantine politics and art in relation with Italian city-states from 1200s to 1500s. But what bring Olof and me together to collaborate was actually my exhibition back in 2021 on the reception of Byzantium in popular culture, and afterwards I continued working on especially in Byzantium and its appropriation in the speculative fiction, and I focused mostly on the fiction that is not actually openly talking about Byzantine history, but in their story worlds, in their creation, somehow in an eclectic way, we'll talk more about that, brings some ideas and tropes from Byzantium to their story world. And since then, I mean, we arranged with Swedish Institute actually a podcast. Then we did the East Pixelated here, and we occasionally work together on these ideas. And we made a roundtable panel in Venice in Byzantine Studies Congress, where actually the theme was again the representations of Byzantium in that was a very widespread topic in some typefaces of the press, and in my case, literature.
There was on Yeşilçam and also Turkish cinema, movies, and there was computer games.
True, so that was another one, and so we've been really working on these reception topics, and especially particularly why Byzantium is chosen, and how, and what is the function of it in these kind of story worlds.
So one could say basically when we got the question also to be here today, we thought, yes, why not do a kind of a discussion that we do anyway?
Yeah.
Why not do it in front of a public?
True.
So we hope you will enjoy that.
Now, we didn't work on Byzantium and Dune before, but we worked on some examples close to Dune. So in our discussions, Dune was coming up frequently. So
yeah, we have been touching upon it from time to time. But should we start actually out by talking a little bit about the whole concept of empire, and especially I think galactic empire, because that's kind of where we are starting when it comes to Dune.
True. Okay, let me go back to sci-fi literature. So in this sci-fi encyclopedia, I cannot give you the credentials in detail, but there's this one, the sci-fi encyclopedia, I think written in the early 2000s or 90s. The term galactic empire was mostly assigned to not as the root, but the most important and most popular example, and one of the earlier ones, the Isaac Asimov's Foundation series. The theme of galactic empire apparently was thrown out to the literature there, and as we know from his Asimov's interviews, and I mean it's been mentioned many places that he actually read Decline and Fall of Roman Empire, and Enlightenment era historian Edward Gibbon's like 10-12 volume history work on Roman Empire. He read that, and he actually kind of wrote a twisted history, but in a sci-fi manner, of a galactic empire in a time of turmoil and decline and fall. And when you think of it, so the galactic empire, that science fiction idea, is actually rooted from the Roman Empire, which can be thought of Byzantine Empire, because Byzantine Empire is the continuation, or even if you look at the more recent historiography, not even continuation, but the Roman Empire itself. And also when we go back to Asimov's Foundation, especially when this character, the mule, comes up to the scene, there is this interpretation that the mule is actually kind of the emergence of Islam, and what he is encountering is an empire in decline, which is Byzantium, when you create the parallel with history. So there we already have this idea of appropriating Roman history, Byzantine history in sci-fi, not in alternative historical fiction, but really totally a different story world. So I think that can be the ground to.
I think it's actually interesting to delve a bit also on the fact that Gibbon, the time when he is active and then the enormous impact he has, because Gibbon is the one who is coloring so much of the modern perception of the Roman, and of course, as we know, of the Byzantine history in general. But it's also notable because in the pre-modern contexts, the empires do not necessarily have these negative connotations that they do get very clearly in Gibbon's time. I mean, we are at the time of Enlightenment, and we are really on the verge of modernity. In the pre-modern context, empires are kind of standing for cosmic orders, but it's not evident that the fall of an empire would mean the destruction of the world. It means mainly that it gives rise to another empire. You have the whole idea about the translatio imperii in Europe, for instance. So for Gibbon, when he's writing this very, very long story of a decline and fall, he's creating almost an apocalyptic scene, because it's very unclear what can come out of that. And of course, what happens then in the course of the ensuing decades, it's that you get a whole row of nationalist movements who are deliberately positioning themselves against empires. Here is interesting with the Ottoman Empire as a kind of the image of a declining empire, which it wouldn't have been in European imagination 200 years before. So I think for that reason, it's Yeah, it's interesting to consider first of all what impact Gibbon has had in general and what it means for, and then why speculative fiction seems to return to the idea of the empire, especially if you look in the 19th and 20th century, when you rather have had the nationalist narratives that have been dominating.
And you said the cosmology of empire. That is actually really important in light of galactic empire, the idea of galactic empire. Okay, when the empire ends, the universe does not get destroyed, but before its fall, actually the empire is kind of the whole cosmos, because in Byzantium the idea of oikoumene is everything. It's the known universe, and outside of it is actually there is an outside for sure, but there is nothing to be worried about. There is nothing to care about. So,
which is similar also if you think about the Iranian or Persian concept of the empire, where Iran is the epitome of order, and that means also an order that doesn't only have to do with how people work and how they live, but it's really how they understand. The language itself is invented by the kings in the Shahnameh, which means that if you're outside of Iran in the world of Turan, which has different connotations now in Turkey, but in the original meaning, that's the word of disorder, where nothing, that's darkness, and nothing can come out of it. The only thing that can really save something and be consciousness, that's the empire.
And in Dune, actually, there is an outside of Imperium, but that outside is only the place for these renegade houses, those houses that cannot cope with the empire and has to flee, and there's this space, but no one knows what is going on there. Maybe in the later books of Herbert's some, but we are mostly today focusing on the first book, and occasionally to the second and the third, so we'll be limited to the first three books, let's say. So,
because that's of course where we come into the concept of which has been exploited for a long time when it comes to Islam and its relation to the Fremen and especially in the first book, but which raises the question of what is the empire if you consider the trope to be intimately linked to the early history of Islam. Because, of course, when you look at early Islamic historiography, what the Arabs are fighting at that time, it's not, as you would see it from a Western point of view, it's not the declining Roman Empire. No. The Roman Empire is there and is very much alive and kicking. And it's for centuries of first the Umayyads and then in the Abbasid era, that is the main empire that the Arabs are dreaming of conquering and destroying to bring about the eschatological promise that is rooted in the early Islamic movement. So that really makes you, if, as has been argued, there is a strong element of Muslimness or of Islamic tropes in Dune when it comes to the Fremen and to the world of the desert, then of course it brings you to the question, yes, but then what is actually the empire?
Since you mentioned Muslimness, actually the title of this talk is actually a reference to another essay, like from 4 years ago, I suppose, by Haris Durrani, The Muslimness of Dune, in which he actually delved into the appendix of the first book to figure out the Muslim Islamic references in Dune. It's a very comprehensive study, specifically focused on the nomenclature, the terms, the Islamic terms and names. So that's, I think, important to mention. And if you didn't encounter that essay, I would strongly suggest. And one thing about Gibbon, I mean, we'll occasionally come back to Edward Gibbon today, because Gibbon is also kind of responsible for, I mean, not directly maybe, but sometimes even directly, for these tropes about Byzantium, these ideas that we are going to see in more detail about the Byzantium. Because Gibbon, even though it's too old, there is a lot new evidence about everything he's been working on, he is still maybe the most popular author among the history enthusiasts, let's say. So, and especially in these times of Asimov, Frank Herbert, and other writers that we are going to talk about, the Gibbon is the historian, so his impact, unfortunately, sometimes is still present, and so we'll see his depictions of Byzantium present in many of these works, specifically in Dune too.
I mean, it might actually be interesting also to mention in this concern that everyone is talking about, Gibbon is regularly blamed among Byzantinists for the fact that people have a very bad idea about Byzantium.
Yeah, I have the purple chair. I should blame him, and that's my duty.
But actually, it might be worth also mentioning, since I have the green chair, it might be actually worth mentioning that when Gibbon is talking about the period of the early conquest of Islam, he's very clearly juxtaposing it in such a way that the Arabs become a positive force. For him, the Arabs are the opposite of the declining empire, because the declining empire is corrupt and that is evil. It is full of hierarchies and ceremonies, whereas the Arabs, they are depicted as they are free, they are uncorrupted, they belong to the nature, they have equality. In the sense, you could, when you look at Gibbon's depictions of the Arabs, it reads very much, or suspiciously much, you could say, almost like Herbert's idea about the Fremen. And I think this is a notable juxtaposition also because it kind of cuts through how we sometimes talk about Orientalism in these worlds. There is a regular way of thinking about Orientalism as a very essentialized concept that is always pertaining especially to Arabs or to Muslim peoples. But here it's kind of the other way around, because here the Orientals, as Gibbon depict them, they are the Byzantines and the Persian empires, but not the Arabs. They are not Orientals in that sense. They are instead seen as a constructive and positive force that, he says it, he even puts it in the words as he say, they later get corrupted by the Byzantines and the Persian Empire, but they are not like that in the beginning. It's a very positive view of the Prophet Muhammad, for instance.
But this parallel between Fremen and Muslims, actually, that is really important, because this idea of, hostile geography, hostile topography created these virtues and strong and energetic people who are one with the nature, their land. That is an important trope, not only in Gibbon, and this idea of empires. Lifetime cycles, right? So this.
No, I mean, for instance, I'm thinking that Gibbon is relying a lot on Plato, as lots of people are doing. This was what Karl Popper was pointing out when he was deconstructing Plato in the 30s, how there is a whole line of talking about the decline and fall of empires. Because for Plato, it's very clear that what was good about ancient civilizations, that's when he imagines the so-called Dorian invasions of Greece. The Dorians are supposed to have been this kind of a very raw, rough race that is coming in from the north, and they are really coming out of harsh conditions, which means that they are suited to build a new civilization, and they are the reason why the corrupt civilizations of ancient Greece, for him ancient Greece, was falling down, and they are best encapsulated in the rule in form you have in Sparta. Whereas, for Plato, the democracy in Athens was despicable. And there is interesting, because Plato is again juxtaposing this to Persia. Persia then it becomes the epitome of an evil and corrupt empire, where women have taken the power and they're educating the sons, which means that they will not become manly, they will become weakened, and the empire will fall. So for Plato, the ideal is sought again in those who come from the harsh conditions, have a very kind of manly upbringing, and they are the ones you need to rely on to create, as he sees it, the ideal state. That's definitely something I can feel Gibbon is also filtering.
And when we come back to the second book, the Dune Messiah, then we see the Arrakis becomes a better, or how to say, more friendly planet, and also more cosmopolitan, let's say, because it is after the jihad, and whole imperium is flocking to the capital, Arrakis. Then we start seeing the traces of corruption, because the conditions are better. there is this plurality. So in these old ideas, these Gibbonian ideas, these Platonic ideas, these are the sources of corruption. So we can see that Herbert is actually repeating these old themes, let's say. So yeah.
One can also bring up also when it comes to within the Islamic historiography, because of course there you have Ibn Khaldun, who's that's the late 14th century, but in Ibn Khaldun's world, it's similarly. He sees it as from the onset. It should actually be added. He's writing this in somewhere in a desert fortress where he's sitting surrounded by an Arabic tribe, because he comes from Maghreb. He comes from the city-states of North Africa, which have all become corrupt. And you suspect when you read his biography that he's actually not completely innocent himself. He has got involved in politics. He's fleeing out into the desert. He's sitting there writing his Muqaddimah, this huge work about which is called like a prologue to history. And there he's explaining that in the natural stage, people live like the Arabs, and then what make them come together each day, they get what they call asabiya, they get the group solidarity, and together, thanks to the group solidarity, they can found empires. They can they can become the rulers of cities, and then they rule, but only for 4 generations, because the first generation, who comes from the harsh conditions, they know how to rule. The second one has learned from them. The third generation has completely grown up in this sheltered environment, and the fourth one cannot sustain it anymore, and then it collapses. So it's a cyclic model here.
Dune actually solved this problem by, putting the second generation and making him a god emperor, making him live like 1,000 years. So I mean, but the corruption, of course, ensues, but there is this idea of trying to maybe getting rid of this generational corruption.
Yeah, and I think
path of corruption.
I think this lies very much at the core also of the whole trope about the empire. That there is a paradox built in all kind of. It doesn't only go for speculative fiction or historiography, but also goes for simple forms of the kind of fairy tale. Is that the empire is. It's simultaneously something you want to fight because you want to prove yourself. If you are this outsider, you are the youngest boy in the family, you are coming from a different environment, and you're showing yourself, you're the hero, you're conquering the empire. But then, of course, you actually want to be the empire. You become the empire yourself, and this sounds very Freudian, but I feel that there is an Oedipal kind of conflict here. It's like you're fighting. You want to kill your father, but you want to be your father. And I guess that Star Wars is probably the ones who have been exploiting this to the most.
And in Paul's case, this killing the father thing works even in a better way, because Paul is so virtuous and maybe lucky that the father died out of his comment, and it actually created a path for him to thrive.
What is interesting here is also when you think about, you pointed out also because Bene Gesserit and the whole female agency that is enclosed here, because there is also in some way of interpreting this kind of cyclical paths that has been used in Jungian psychology, where you talk about passive masculine giving rise to active feminine and so on. This very much feels like, because in Paul's case, the father is, in a sense, the weaker person. Well, he is the weaker person, and he dies. And it's Jessica who is the one who is providing, actually giving the power to the son. So I think there is an element of female agency here. That's
true, but the element of female agency actually tends to end with Paul, because that agency actually sabotage itself, because they created Kwisatz Haderach. Sorry for the pronunciation. So that can be only a male, if you remember. So with Paul, there is this transfer of agency from female to male. There are such interpretations too. So and then even Paul himself occasionally blames. I mean, he is benefiting from the Bene Gesserit power, the training, but he's always actually blaming the Bene Gesserit organization, the persons, even his mother too. So there's this there is this love and hate relation, I think, between them. So
yeah, no, I was just thinking, actually, this is an interesting aspect also of when you think about the perception of empires and the way in which they are usually depicted as where you have active female agents. I mean, in a reception of Byzantium, I don't think I need to stress how often there is a misogynistic tendency also to highlight, for instance, Empress Theodora or Zoe and the later Theodora in the 11th century. I mean, first by Procopius and then by Psellos.
Maybe it is important to stress that these are the politically active and strong female figures.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
which become like, I mean, again, by male historiographers, they are depicted as the harbingers of doom. They are the one who are causing the downfall of the empire. They are corrupting their men. They are, and there is this, again, very Platonic, and because of that also very misogynic. But there is this undertone of that the female agency is what ultimately makes the male agents fall, and they get weakened and they fall victim to stronger new men that are coming up.
Yeah. Should we go on to some of the works that we think related to Dune and we worked on it? Would you like to say about this?
I can return a little bit to the paper I gave at, I should say, Arkady Martinez workshop a few years ago. And again, I was approaching this from two speculative works. The first one from 1971 is by Jean d'Ormesson.
6 years later after Dune.
Yeah, exactly. And it's another one was Harry Turtledove's Agent of Byzantium. D'Ormesson's work is probably least known. He was himself a member of the French Academy, died I think 2 or 3 years ago, and wrote scripts for TV series and so on. The Glory of the Empire is a very strange work in many ways, because that is written like an academic history of an empire that never existed. So for Jean d'Ormesson, when he's writing it, he's always making quotations to non-existing literary or scientific works, as if he's like, putting footnotes in, having a bibliography, and we start reading it, it's like the names are like Max and Moritz Struwwelpeter, who has written, like it's like a completely fictional kind of list of people. But what is also the point in d'Ormesson is that he's always making reference all the time also to the reception of his fictional empire in art works and literary works that are known to us. So he, for instance, is telling all the time, like, this was the scene that was famously depicted then later by Giotto, or you find the reference to this in Marcel Proust, for instance. So he's created this kind of a completely fictional empire that sounds, if it's real. And for geographical and chronological reasons, it's very clear that his empire is kind of Byzantium, and yet it's not. I mean, he has at a few times, he's making explicit mention of Byzantium as if it was a completely different entity. But at the same time, when you read it, the story is the history of Byzantium, but like a much bigger and much more fantastic empire that is uniting all the countries of the Eastern Mediterranean. And the big hero is this. He's this kind of a Paul Atreides figure who is uniting the empire and making it great and glorious again. And he has a long biography which he spent in his youth, at that time in Alexandria, which is depicted as a kind of a fantastic late ancient world, which is both pagan and Christian, and where he goes in the teaching for a female philosopher, and then he goes abroad, he has his wanderings, and until he's finally uniting the empire into one. He's kind of this figure which is both the rebel who's fighting against the empire, and then he's becoming the empire. So that was one work. The other one, Harry Turtledove, which I'm not sure if some of you are acquainted with, he published a series of short stories called together The Agent of Byzantium in Isaac Asimov's series in the late 1970s. And this is a piece of counterfactual history in which he imagines a Byzantine empire that has kept existing because, which is also interesting when we talk about Dune, because in Asimov's counterfactual history, Muhammad, the prophet, became actually a Christian monk. So it means he somehow ended up integrated with the Byzantine cosmos. There was never an Arab uprising because the prophet instead ended up within the Byzantine sphere. And as a result, the Byzantine Empire is still the main empire of the known world. And the agent, who is a kind of a James Bond type, he goes around on the fringes, usually fighting against its enemies, which are like Germans, which are, of course, like extremely barbarian and not at all civilized. The main empire, of course, that he's fighting with is the Persian on the east, and he has this kind of a female nemesis.
They thrive too because of lack of Islam, right?
Exactly. And of course, his main nemesis is a woman, so you get this kind of also again of a trope where he as a male, and by the end, is victorious over her. And so also on the way, he's inventing a lot of things that we know as like book printing or gunpowder. Or remember, there is even a story where he's trying to pacify a group of Georgian rebels by inventing brandy. So he's getting them all drunk. Anyway, so that's what I think is interesting. That story is set in a fictional 14th century. But when you read Turtle Dove, it's clear that he imagines a Byzantium that kind of just keeps going like a clockwork. I mean, okay, there is no Muhammad, so it's just the Byzantium that you know from Gibbon keeps going and thriving, but it's like they are not changing at all. They keep having church council, they keep reciting ancient poetry, they keep dressing like they did in the time of Justinian. So it's like he has a very biologistic approach to it, whereas, just to conclude, whereas if you look at D'Ormesson, he's not at all interested in what actually happened, because to him everything is just a reception that is around it. Within that box, anything could have happened.
Yeah, in Turtle Dove, invention actually comes from the encounter with the fringe actors.
So, that is true. Which is
otherwise, there is no need for invention there. So it's kind of a capitalistic way of telling history, right?
Yes. And of course, you could argue also that in that case there is also a connection to Dune.
Okay. Sure.
No, so basically, what I think is interesting here, and it might say more about how we approach Byzantium, but in the sense that there are two ways of approaching it, as if it was this kind of an entity that thrived as a plant or something that just needed to keep going, and it would basically be the same but much bigger than we have, or the other one, which says that maybe Byzantium didn't exist at all. And it doesn't matter, because what matters are the stories we tell about it. And then, of course, in D'Ormesson's world, he acts as if we are still telling the stories about this fantastic empire, even if it never existed. So that was basically the basis for my... And I don't know if you would like to continue also here on the...
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say my more recent work, because, as Olof told, these... research kind of became a source for how we are approaching Dune and what we are thinking of Dune and Byzantium when we bring them together. In my case, I recently focused on two authors. One is Jeff Vandermeer and his City of Saints and Madmen from the 2001, and the other is Gene Wolfe, The Book of the New Sun, started to be published in 1980s. So unlike Olof's material, mine actually does not have anything to do with Byzantium in the surface level, let's say, because there is no mention of Byzantium, there is one empire in one case, but there are tropes, especially tropes that are implemented from study and research on Byzantium that we know from the interviews of the authors, both Jim Wolfe and Jeff Vandermeer. And one thing, especially Jim Wolfe said, kind of impacted my work a lot, my kind of, let's say, methodology, is that I like to quote this, really, because in an interview he was asked about the historical sources, and he says, insofar as I was trying to create any kind of parallels with an actual historical period here on Earth, and obviously I wasn't aiming at developing an exact analogy, this part is important for me, I was thinking of Byzantium. So the problem here is that I didn't give you a summary, but maybe you are familiar with Jim Wolfe's work. That is actually in the far future. There is there's a planet and kind of an empire going on, and there's this emperor also, but the setting is, I will say that, but setting looks like medieval, and he actually insists that it is not medieval, a European Middle Ages, but Byzantium. So, and in Jeff Vandermeer's case, it's a city-state in a parallel universe, let's say, nothing to do with. I mean, there are some hints that there is a relation with our world, but it's like a 900 years of history of a city-state, and one particular era is specifically looks like some Byzantine ideas. So, but the thing is, when we think of Dune, or at least I think of Dune, I'm not trying to create or find the complete parallels and look to say, look how this is Byzantium and this is not, and this is the Byzantinistic idea and this is not. This analogy does not work because it ends here. He twisted something. No, actually, they purposefully do that, the authors, in order to create their own story world by only benefiting some eclectic parts, sometimes randomly. For instance, in Jeff Vandermeer's case, he explicitly says, I found those strange names through looking Byzantine history, because he says, their first name is always a familiar one, like John, but the second name is very strange and weird, like Monomachos. But what he says is actually the historiography in his time, like Norwich, for instance, John Julius Norwich, he benefited a lot from him, or the Oxford Dictionary of Byzantium. They have this, consensus to give the first names in an anglicized version. So instead of Johannes, they say John. But for the surnames, they give the Greek word. So it's not a strange word, just a Greek word. So he almost randomly chose this historiographical pattern and implemented in his fiction to alienate to create this strange story world. And in Gene Wolfe's case, he actually boasts a lot by saying that he did not create a new language for his works, but it looks like there is a new language. There is so much. Looks like there is neologism, but actually it's archaism. He benefited from Oxford's classical dictionary, but the one that is really a few volumes long. So he heavily implemented Latin and Greek words, especially Greek words, when it comes to religion, mostly. So this orthodoxy idea goes. Whatever historiography they had in their time, that's randomly sometimes influenced their work. So in Dune as well, while we approach, we keep those ideas in mind, and we focus on how empires evolve, or how the tropes work. I'm kind of obsessed with the tropes, and both the historiographical source of tropes and also the function and why to implement that. So
I think it's an important argument actually to make here when we talk about Dune and its Muslimness and possibly Byzantinness. And Byzantinness, for instance, a few years before Dune, we have Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, shifting into fantasy here, which I realized during that Arkady Martinez conference, that because after 2 days there were basically two factions in the room, because it was very clear that the fantasy authors and sci-fi authors didn't like each other, but it's a different story. Because lots has been written about how Tolkien is receiving Byzantine history, because more or less you can claim that Gondor is heavily based upon Byzantium, and the whole idea that you have it's a remnant of an empire that once was great and kept the enemies and mainly the eastern barbarians at bay, and now it's kind of sick and dying, and it needs to be reinvigorated, and you're always surrounded ever by the ruins of an empire that was long ago. This is basically, I mean, if you can argue, lots has been written about racism in Tolkien and so on, but I would rather focus on what Tolkien, of course, has been heavily drawing on is Western European, Germanic, Celtic mythology, which is set in a Western Europe where the Roman Empire has disappeared. You are surrounded by the ruins of an empire that existed long ago, and that colors also your perception of what it was and what it might be, and also the way in which you imagine yourself maybe starting to, during the Crusaders, for instance, starting to fight these. So for Tolkien, if you look at Tolkien's world and consider that Gondor as a kind of a Byzantium fits with a Western historiographic tradition, then you could very much make the same argument when you talk about Dune, that it fits very well with an Islamic historiographic tradition, because that's really the point of it, that from an Islamic point of view, it's not about the empire that needs to be saved from the barbarians. It's on the contrary. The barbarians kind of are the ones that are going to save the world by destroying the empire, because the empire is evil and corrupt, and you need to destroy it, and that's kind of your mission as these good outsiders. There is one possible parallel that we talked about also earlier, which I guess also has a certain allure in the modern period, and that, of course, when you look at the reception of Greek history and the Greek battle against the Persian Empire, which again fits very well with the early Islamic historiography, which, as you may know, is not not precisely positive towards the Persians either. Byzantines and Persians are the two big empires that you fight, but the Persians fall first. So there is also, you could also argue that, for instance, in a movie or comic franchise like 300, you also have something of this trope in it, in which the empire is not a distant memory of something that you want to revive, but on the contrary, it's a living reality which you need to fight if you want to survive. So I think this is an important argument precisely when it comes to the historiography in which this is colored.
And maybe we should now tell about the direct link maybe that we could say about the Dune and Byzantium, and where it became clear that there is this Byzantine Empire in the minds of these very far future dynasties, and they actually know of Byzantium in a way that Gibbon knows of Byzantium, because I will quote now, after the Harkonnen scheme laid out, and Hawat Tufir escaped, and he encountered a Fremen person. He actually fears that Fremen will sell him to Harkonnens. And the Fremen says, the Fremen removed his hand from his weapon. You think we have the Byzantine corruption? You don't know us. The Harkonnens have not voted enough to buy the smallest child among us. So his use of Byzantine here, in English there is this word of the word Byzantine, this pejorative word, means many things, but mostly untrustful and backstabbing. But here, one thing is very important, that the Byzantine was written with capital B. So there is obviously the connection was to the empire, not to this English adjective that became a widespread thing when Dune was written. So there is this idea of decadent backstabbing, these intricate bureaucracy and politics thing. Was the source of it was Byzantine Empire, and this. Please note the juxtaposition of Harkonnens and the mention of Byzantine corruption. So actually, the Harkonnens seems to be the ultimate, let's say, inheritors of Byzantine Empire.
But did you find that there was a fan fiction which actually tries to link this?
I'm not sure if it is a fan fiction, but I couldn't find in any of the Herbert's, not only me, but this Maximilian Lau that we'll talk about, couldn't find any mention of Byzantium in Herbert's interviews, and not in 6 books there is no mention of Byzantium except for this. But in this, okay, since we are talking about popular culture, I will quote this. So in Dune Wiki, there is this, bloodline, this lineage from Harkonnen and Corino houses to the Palaiologos dynasty, or the last dynasty of Byzantines. So one says, according to historians, the house Corino descends from Thomas Palaiologos, the brother of Constantine the 11th, the last emperor of the Byzantine Empire. House Harkonnen claimed descent from them too. So, and it says, but this was not proven. I mean, it was not proven in the in the books nor in the interviews. I don't know the source because it doesn't give a source. But it is interesting that there is this idea of link between Byzantium and Harkonnens and Corino. And in fact, since Atreides and Harkonnens and also Corino are relatives, so there is this blood relation. Atreides is also from the Palaiologoi. So, but I mean, this is let's say apocryphal knowledge. So.
But correct me if I'm wrong. Thomas Palaiologos, isn't that the one who ends up actually in the Ottoman Empire?
I think he is the one ends up in Italy.
Okay, right.
Demetrius went to Ottomans.
Otherwise, it would be interesting also to consider the fact that he would be doubly corrupted because he's not only Byzantine, but he also went over to the Orthodox.
You think he's not doubly corrupted because he went to Europe?
Maybe.
Just kidding. Apart from this fan fiction, let's say, I really give a lot of importance to this Byzantine corruption and Harkonnen relation. And there is this, repeated sentence in the first book. I cannot recall, but it's like plot within plot within plot, something like that. So there's this idea of scheming, and that is also again in a Harkonnen thing. Actually, the Baron himself boasts of these intricate plans. There are many layered plans. I mean, when we talk in the book, he mostly talks about how clever he was to create these plots, and never boasts about his military power. I mean, he's totally an opposite of what Fremen represents, what Atreides represents. And
then we're back to the whole cloak and dagger trope. This basically, that's you're not fighting as men eye to eye, but it's a misogynistic trope, I would say, also partly.
This is kind of let's say throwback to the exhibition where we dwelled on this cloak and dagger, let's call it in that way, trope in the representation of Byzantium, mostly focusing on the Justinianic times, because there is Theodora, and also what was the name? Antonina, right? The commander's wife.
Yes, you mean of Belisarius.
Belisarius' wife, Antonina. So these evil but strong female figures there, and also in the later times too, of course. So
I mean, again, there is something here to. I think some of you may know this poem by Cavafis, which is called "Waiting for the Barbarians." A poem which has often been quoted as heavily, actually mirroring a late Roman world where you are getting slowly corrupted. It's depicting how the emperor is sitting on a throne and he has this purple cloak and it's full of jewels and gold, and this is how he's going to, tell the barbarians who are coming that they don't have a power, because the barbarians, it says in the poems, are easily bedazzled by looking at all of these kind of things. And it's like many people have read this as a depiction of the late ancient Roman Empire as it's slowly getting petrified and is becoming, how can you say, it's losing its dynamic because it's tried to settle for very stiff and strict ways of ceremonies and of hierarchies in order to maintain its power. Now, interestingly, there was a scholar a few years ago who pointed out, and now of course the scholar's name eludes me, but Pontani, I think, Filippo Maria Pontani. Anyway, that this is actually almost exactly taken from a passage of Nikitas Choniates.
Okay.
So that we are that time not talking about the late ancient period. We're talking about the time just before the Fourth Crusade, which, as you know, is actually the main devastating episode in the whole Byzantine history.
In 1204.
Yes, when the Western Crusaders are destroying the city. And 20 years before that, in the wake of as you still have the Third Crusade, there are a group of German envoys coming to the capital, and the Emperor Isaac Angelos tries to impress them by receiving them on a throne like that with lots of jewels. And the only effect of that is that the Germans are looking at that strange kind of apparition, and they're coming to the conclusion that the Byzantines are very effeminate and they are very weak, and it will be very easy to rob them of all of the riches. Which is kind of when you look at what's happening then in the Fourth Crusades. That's basically what's Isaac Angelos is the emperor who contributes to the Fourth Crusade, and when you look at it from that perspective, it becomes like it's different than just the empire becoming petrified and stiff in the wake of barbarian invasions. It's almost like it's inviting the barbarians to take over because it's showing itself to be weak. So.
Yeah. And rich.
And rich, yes. So there is lots of things.
Since you mentioned Nikitas Choniates, whose one of the enemies was Anna Komnene 100 years before. By the way, Nikitas Choniates is the historiographer of Byzantium who mentioned the Fourth Crusade. So that's a Byzantine historian, and this Anna Komnene is maybe because of Maximilian Lau's research. Actually, there is this one important person in Dune universe which really heavily and maybe completely correspond with a Byzantine character, who is Anna Komnene, who is the only known, let's say, the historian with a work that we have, a female historian with a work that we have from Byzantium. Her work is Alexiad, and there is this Princess Irulan character in Dune, and Irulan, probably the first words we read is from Irulan, because her words are the epigraphs at the beginning of every chapter in Dune, especially in the first book. So she is a prolific writer. She is a historian, has her own memoir. She has philosophical treatises, I suppose those. So there are like 21 works by her, if I remember correctly. And we see some parts, and the parallel is that Irulan is actually has an ambition, has a very important goal in those works, as far as we can see from those epigraphs, and that is to paint her father in a good way, to say that her father, of course, being the emperor in Paul's rebellion, the Emperor Padishah Shaddam IV. So this Emperor Padishah is like the both Eastern and Western rulers merged in one character. So her narrative tells us a story of a guy who was kind of corrupted or consumed within this Bene Gesserit and courtly woman's plot. So she's trying to absolve his father from the crimes against Atreides. and also she somehow makes Paul in this messianic figure too, maybe in order to also absolve her sins against Paul, because in the second book she actually plotted against Paul. She, I suppose, tried to poison Chani, Paul's concubine, for her not to produce heirs. So in order to, with the wish of salvaging, let's say, Paul's love. So there is this parallel with Anna Komnene. She is also creating an important figure out of her father, and she also plays a part in the plot against her own brother. So I don't know if you wanna take on from here, but so this Irulan character and Anna Komnene as historiographers and as scheming woman plays huge parts, and I mean it's kind of really obvious, but it was really shocking for me to realize the depiction and the life story of them, and also Irulan in the works on Dune and also in the Dune universe is always shown in a bad way. And in Byzantine historiography as well, especially by Niketas Koniates, Anna Komnene is shown as a bad character, bad person. So, but interestingly, the recent studies both on Dune and Byzantium tries to, or let's say, put another perspective on both these female figures as, strong and prolific intellectual politicians, actually. So there's an interesting development about these characters going on. So that's something to keep an eye on, I think.
Yeah, I don't know if I have so much to add there apart from what we already said about there is a strong correlation between receptions of empires in general and again the misogynistic tendencies to blame the fall upon women. I mean, the Ottoman Empire is another example where I mean Hürrem becomes like the main villain in some depictions, and then the Shafia and the Kösem and all the rest are depicted as the ones who are like the agents of the fall. And you could make the same argument when you look at for instance in Alexander's time, he's like Roxolana gets the blame, Cleopatra gets the blame for Antony not winning over the Roman Empire and so on. I think that's probably also an important part of the trope. But I wonder if we should conclude here also by just saying a few words when it comes to, so we have talked about historiography, and we talked about tropes, but also visually it's interesting when you think about architecture. Now I can't remember, we used one picture from, I think it's a French edition here of Dune.
It's from 76, I suppose.
Right. This is something that has been much pointed out when The Lord of the Rings, for instance, they were made by Peter Jackson. It was a lot of people pointed out to what extent Byzantine architecture has actually influenced the way in which what Goddard.
Also in the new series, even more in an emphasized way. So it was
there is. You remember that many years ago in Sweden we had a young master student who wrote a paper on the. Actually on popular depictions of Byzantium, which he called domed and doomed, which was a very ingenious way of putting it. But there is something about, there are always domes involved when you want to depict something as being Byzantine. And, well...
But in Dune's case, maybe we can add one more thing to that, which is the Cappadocian settlements of Byzantium, which is very... I would say, in a very unique settlement way, because they are rock cut churches and residential areas, and they really show some parallels with the siege. I don't know the pronunciation, but of Fremens. So there are also rock cut settlements, huge tunnel networks going on there and stuff. So this was there too, and also actually this might sound far-fetched, but in again Maximilian Lau's article, I think he quotes from the depiction of Arakin after Paul's rebellion succeeded. So he gives some architectural details. I quote, postern out of most ancient Baghdad, a dome dreamed in mythical Damascus. So there is this dome. And also the orchards rival those of fabled Lebanon. So especially this parallel with Damascus, the mythical Damascus, is, you know, when you think of the most ancient and most interesting building in Damascus, it is the Umayyad Mosque, which in turn actually a Byzantine, let's say, heavily influenced by Byzantine architecture and also artistic ornamentation. So there is still some elements, although indirectly, going back to Byzantine art and architecture. And also this quotation, this citation shows another direct link to our history here. So
I mean, I like, of course, the parallel when you say talk about Cappadocia, because that would basically mean that Anatolia is the planet Arrakis, which would fit very nicely with Yeşil Cam pictures of Cüneyt Arkın fighting both aliens and Byzantines.
I think that's a nice way to finish this session. Yeah, it's a climactic moment. Yeah.
So we hope you have enjoyed the talk. I don't know if there is something you would like to ask. Any questions about the dynastic relations of the Atreides? I leave to Emir to answer because I don't feel that confident.
But I'm not a formal historian of Atreides dynasty. I must remind that too. Yeah. Thank you.
If you
Yeah.
allow me. The last point you made about Cappadocia and Byzantium. Cappadocia churches, aren't they prior to Byzantium time? Can we just compare them with?
I think that, there are rock cut settlements that have been there long before Byzantium. So I don't think it's generally
early Christians. Can we call them Byzantium?
I think it's more like, I think you meant more like in general that landscape is could be kind of inspired by.
And also especially after Byzantium, when the Christianity became established, and even though they don't need to hide anymore because the state itself is Christian, so there are these very detailed and established rock cut settlements persisted. Sometimes became home for heterogeneous
so sects and
sects, let's say, and also the architectural development thrived there with Byzantium. I mean, the quality of being somewhere to escape and hide changed with Byzantium, especially in the, let's say, Middle Ages part, so in Middle Byzantium.
At least, ironically, until the Arabs came.
So, sure. True.
I think Cappadocia's settlements are best known for the iconoclastic times during Byzantine Empire, right? So.
Yeah, with popular perception, you may say that, of course. Yeah, but since you can hide there, maybe you can hide your art too. That's what I mean. And it is far away from the center.
Ben bir şey sorabilir miyim?
Buyurun.
Ben merak ediyorum, Anadolu'daki yerleşim yerlerinden kadınlara ait manastır olarak bildiğiniz herhangi bir yer var mı?
I mean, she asks about women monasteries.
Yeah.
I mean, yani herhangi bir yer ve liste değil de bu çok yaygın bir şey. İstanbul'un içinde de, Anadolu'da da çok yaygın bir şey, kadın manastırları. Bizans'ta.
Ben şehir Trabzon'dan biliyorum. Bir kadınlar manastırı var. Şimdi son olarak Kültür Bakanlığı tarafından restore edildi. bir keresinde de Patmos'taki Kadınlar Manastırı'nı gezmiştim. Oradaki ikisi arasında çok benzerlikler gördüğümü düşünüyorum. Kadınların bir arada yaşarken geliştirdikleri kültürle şehrin kültürü arasındaki o alışveriş bence çok belirleyici olabiliyor o çağda. Onun için sormak istedim.
Teşekkürler. Yani dediğim gibi çok yaygın bir şey. Kadınlardan oluşan manastırlar, hatta kadın hamilerin kurduğu manastırlar. Özellikle de geç dönem Bizans'ta çok yaygın bir şey. Örneğin, buyurun.
Alexios Komnenos, yani Bizans dışında kalmış bir Trapezius imparatorluğu olarak, yani Trabzon'daki Komnenos hanedanı.
O sonraki
Yani 1453'te İstanbul fethediliyor. 1461'de daha sonra Osmanlı hakim oluyor. O aradaki kültürel etkileşim açısından ben biraz merak ettim.
Yani orada da ilginç tabii, yani Trabzon'da kendi imparatorluk anlatısı. I'm sorry for that. Kendi imparatorluk.
I understand. So it's
but I will translate to you when I need to ask something. So yani o da kendi imparatorluk anlatısını kurarken o Komnenos bağlantısını çok vurgulamak istiyor ki, çünkü İstanbul'da Palaiologos hanedanı hakim ve sizden önceki büyük hanedan ve aslında Komnenos biraz altın çağ gibi de gösterilir hep. Ona yapmaya çalışıyor yani. Bağını onunla tutmaya çalıştığı için o Komnenosluğu vurgulayan bir şey. O paralel bir gelişim tabii artık, yani İstanbul'la Trabzon'dakilere aslında farklı devletler gözüyle bakmak lazım yani. İkisi de Roma İmparatorluğu biziz şeyinde olsa da.
Yohannes olayı çok Yunus ismi çok verilen bir isimdir. O eski eğer Trabzon'daki Ayasofya Kilisesi'ne giderseniz oradaki fresklerde çok fazla Yunus tarafından yutulup kurtarılan, bacanın karnında saklanan Yunus peygamber hikayesi vardır ve Karadeniz'de çok yaygın kullanılan bir isimdir. O John de bana biraz onu çağrıştırıyor.
Yani yanılmıyorsam Yohannes'le Yunus aynısı değil ama Yunus, do you remember? What was the Greek name for Jonas? Do you remember? Not Yohannes, right?
No, they are different because that's from the prophet Jonah.
Yeah.
No, I mean they're both Hebrew in origin, but actually in that's a good question. I don't know in Greek actually.
I couldn't. Yani
no, that's. I think it's Jonah.
Ama Yohannes'le Jonah. Okay. Yani Yohannes'le Yunus farklı kimlikler. Ama yani açıkçası bilmiyorum. Yani özellikle Yunus'a neden orada bir yani o Komnenosların hanedanının yani çünkü var Bizans'ta. Kendisiyle, ailesiyle bağlantılı gördüğü, mesela Palaiologoslar için bu Aziz Demetrios'tur. Onunla bağlantılı gördüğün, kendi ailenle bağlantılı gördüğün Aziz'i daha fazla kullanırsın kiliselerinde. Yani bu hem sanatsal olarak süslemelerinde hem de kiliseyi ona adamak anlamında. Hatta bazen imparatorun kendisini o Aziz gibi gösterdiği şeyler olur, süslemeler olur. Ama yani Yunus'un özellikle Trabzon'daki Komnenoslarla bağlantısını doğrusu bilemiyorum.
Savaştığın kişinin hanedanıyla evlenerek barış kurma girişimi aslında bu Bizans'ta çok yaygın olan bir şey.
Evet.
Şeyde de var yani Komnenoslar'da
var.
Evet. Var. O Zanos Paşa'nın kızı Gülbahar Hatun Kanuni ile evlenip sonra şehzadeliği geçerken orada Yavuz'un doğması falan bütün o şeyler.
Yani o tabii daha farklı ve ilginç. Yani aslında Osmanlı'nın dediğiniz gibi Süleyman'a kadar olan döneminde Bizanslı bürokratların devamı demeyelim de Bizanslı bürokratların rolü yani devlet aygıtında çok belirgin ve vurgulu ve hem evlilikler de oluyor. Ayrıca yüksek rütbelere gelip çalışmalar da yapıyorlar diyeyim. Yani o geçiş döneminde yani 1400'den gerçekten 1500'lerin ortalarına yoğun bir Bizans bürokrasisinin yeri var, yani Osmanlı bürokrasisinde yeri var.
thank you for the great conversation. I must say I got very envious of your relationship when you talk. I want to ask this question. You know, the Atreides surname comes from Atreus, which is Atreus, and I don't remember their mother's name.
Jessica. No, not Paul's name. Okay,
Greek,
sorry. Okay, Greek name.
Irope, Atreus and Irope's sons. The Atreides means the sons of Atreus, and I'm curious if there's any connection in the books regarding the Troya War or the other things. For example, the Agamemnon kills his daughter Iphigenia, and the other maybe the Atreus and his brother. One of them make them eat the other's children in a fest. Is there any mentions in the books regarding this? And also, you didn't mention the Atreus names come from the Greek.
Yeah, because
True. I'm curious why.
No, I can only say the Greek connection. I think it's very clear, and then of course it's unclear whether this should be considered a Byzantine one or a Greek in general, because the Atreus myth is so. I mean, it's so associated with ancient Greek rather than Byzantine. I personally, when I read Dune, my perception was very clearly that it was a kind of a Byzantine reference. But I mean, this is something one could probably discuss.
But I mean, when you think of later Byzantine scholars, let's say, one came to my mind at least. He tries to create a connection with the Aeneas, actually. So not with the Atreus house dynasty.
That would be the Roman way of doing it.
I mean that he's trying to create a connection with Romans. So he goes back to Aeneas. So the other, the opponent of the Atreus dynasty in the Trojan Wars. So in that way, at least some of the later Byzantine intellectuals wasn't thinking of the Greeks, the winners of the Trojan Wars, but the others.
But it's actually confusing because Nikitas Koniates, when he's describing the Crusaders, he's calling them Aenids.
Okay, that's
so it's actually also confusing. It's like he's saying, like, okay, they are the one who are the sons of Aeneas because they are from the Latin West, and we are then the Greeks. Which it's confusing. I don't think really that by the end the Byzantines were very clear anymore about, because the Trojan legend, of course, was essential to the ancient Romans to show that we are the sons of Aeneas. We were the refugees of Rome, and when we are conquering now the Greek world, we are basically taking back or even taking revenge. There is this story also that Mehmet the Conqueror goes to Troy, and that he's claiming that he has taken revenge. So it's
Atatürk.
True. I mean, obviously there's a reference to Troy, but so in that case, should we think that Arrakis is Troy and they came and is it a consolidation of at House of Atreus and the Trojans, because they don't destroy Arrakis with Paul, but they kind of merge together there. So I don't know how to think of that, but the reference is clear.
I mean, again, if we return to Plato, but that's very far-fetched now. But I mean, then we would be that, because of course in the Agamemnon and the Mycenaean kingdoms, they fall to these Doric invasions that Plato are imagining as the epitome of good barbarian. But I don't know. We are getting lost here, I feel.
Please.
I want to ask another very speculative question about the Atreus family. Well, as you mentioned, that the Corino and Harkonnen dynasties are linked to the Paleologos family.
I mean, we don't know, maybe.
But not thinking about the Byzantine Empire, probably he refers all the empires as a concept to all the corrupted empires. But the family, Atreus, of course, it's Greek too, but it refers to antiquity, to a city-state culture. And in the novel, we see that the Paul Atreides is a order breaker. It's a nomos breaker.
True.
And also, Leto is another nomos breaker. So I think that the Harkonnen and Corrino dynasties and empires are in the one side. So Atreides family and their changing demand is on the other side. So not maybe a reference to the Byzantine or Greek roots, but to an empire culture and to a liberal state culture.
I think
Is it possible?
I think this is a very important point, because also something that when you look at 19th century movements that are directed against empire, like where you have in nationalists, what they like to do is depict themselves as these. They are the harbingers of a liberal revolution against a corrupt imperial order. And for instance, you see on the French side, in the French Revolution, what they do, because they, of course, they don't want to associate with the Germans, as you would do in Germany, or in England you would associate with the Anglians, or I mean, in Sweden people thought they came from the Goths or whatever. But in France they couldn't do that. But what they did was that they were associated with the Roman Republic. So they were like the Romans in the good days, when they were still like in favor of change, and they were still not an empire, and they were still like, you know, proponents of having a liberal kind of constitution. I think here is something interesting, and that is that of all the empires, you can tell also the story of the Ottomans, that they have a time when they are, you know, they are fighting because they are small, and they have a kind of an almost equalitarian order, or like Gibbon describes the Arabs. There is one empire you can't do that with, and that's the Byzantine one. The Byzantine Empire is the only empire that doesn't have a barbarian past. It didn't have a time when it was small and fighting, because before the Byzantine were only the Romans. So it's kind of an empire that in people's mind came into being as an empire and died as an empire. And I feel there is something here with the trope.
But I think that's really a good point, and thank you. And if we assume that this Palaiologos lineage works, then maybe, I mean, it reminded me of the late 19th century Greek historiography, because, you know, in the Greek historiography, in early Greek historiography, it's a space of negotiation and conflict on the decision of if they should include Byzantium as their ancestors or not. I mean, there's this in Greek historiography, there's this diachrony from ancient Greeks to these independent warriors. There's no break. This triumphal history goes on, but Byzantium was a later addition to that, and still problematic. So if we think that the Atreides goes back to House of Atreus, and Harkonnen and Corrino is Palaiologos, then that makes sense. You know, the Atreides is the pure and the golden age thing, and, you know, Harkonnen and Corrino represents the corruption. So thank you for that. Yeah.
I think I can add also here, they're especially interesting when you look at the nationalism in the late Ottoman Empire, because it's very clear that the way in which new nations also are historically constructed is that they are turning away from the millet system, but they're also turning away basically from the Byzantine way of defining you according to theological definition. For instance, Syrianis will start to say that no, we're actually Assyrians.
Yeah.
We have nothing to do with whatever the Ottomans or the Byzantine called us. We go back to the ancient Assyrians, and the same for Greeks and so on. So it's that's a very interesting point.
Thank you.
Bize sormayı denemeyeceğim. Tahmin soracağım. Kısa Sadarek'ten biraz daha bahseder misiniz diyecektim, çünkü bu dinlere mi referans, yoksa herhangi bir imparatorluğun, Roma'nın veya Bizans'ın böyle bir hayali söz konusu mu? Bene Cezaretler tam bir din gibi değiller. Ben böyle kitapları okumamış birisi olarak, yani popülerleştiği için ilgilenen birisi olarak soruyorum. Yani Kısa Sadarek bir şeye benzemiyor çünkü. Yani Mahdi diyorlar, kitaplar diyorlar anladığım kadarıyla. Çok iyi bilmeden de Mehdi dünyanın sonuna getirecek kişi gibi ama orada imparatorluğun, daha doğrusu insanlığın sonsuza kadar devam edebilmesini sağlayan bir karakter gibi ya. Ne diyebilirsiniz? Yani çeşit geçmişten yani gerçek dünyanın tarihindeki işte imparatorluklardan birinin bir niyeti ya da arzusuna benzer bir şey mi, yoksa tamamen dini bir figür mü Kıbrıs olarak?
Buna bir cevabım var ama bir çevirmek istiyorum. Bence Olof'un da söyleyecekleri var. So the can you tell more about Kıbrıs and religion? What does it represent really in that case? And what comes to my mind is actually this. İngilizce cevaplayayım mı yoksa bu arada?
Tabii İngilizce
Tamam.
cevaplayabilirsin. Ben soruyu
Tamam.
tam bilmediğim için
Tamam.
Türkçe oluşturabiliyorum.
So I was thinking about this, idea of this absolute
Yeah.
monarch,
Yeah.
but they, break the problem of, giving away the power because, it's almost immortal, and we have that in Arkady Martin's idea of monarch, and also in Jim Wolf. So I was thinking in those lines, but if you have anything.
But did I understand it wrong? Because you also asked about the Mehdi figure? No.
Yeah, true.
Because what I think is
Because he's called as Mehdi as well.
Yeah.
So Kıbrıs Sadarak
Yeah.
and Mehdi. So is it because Mehdi is the destroy? He comes at the end. So and
Yes.
it destroys the order at the end.
But I mean, this is an interesting aspect also when you look at the Byzantine concept of eschatology, and that is that there is an inbuilt conflict in the Byzantine Empire when it tries to be both Roman and Christian, because we know the early Christians, they didn't exactly align with Rome. They saw Rome as the great Babylon that had to fall. But in Byzantine, also in the Byzantine times, there was a concept that one day the empire has to fall in order to give rise to the kingdom of God. And this is interesting when you look at the early Islamic period, because you have at the same time eschatological traditions circulating among both Christians and Muslims that are strikingly similar in many ways, in which they are imagining the empire as falling somehow, but they are unclear what it will give rise to instead. So I think, in the Islamic Islamic hadith, you would find the idea, for instance, that the Muslims, they conquer Constantinople, and then the Dajjal comes to Damascus, and Jesus has to go out and fight him. And Jesus would be then in the figure of the Mehdi. So there is, in the Islamic tradition, there is an idea that the fall of Constantinople is actually just the last stage before the final battle. And in Byzantine historiography, you will find the story then that the Muslims, the Arabs, they will say, will conquer Constantinople, but after that, the emperor will drive them out and conquer the whole world and give all power to God in Jerusalem. So there is a very interesting similarity, which also tells you a lot about what kind of conflicts were probably brewing in both the Umayyad and Byzantine empires at the same time.
And Kıbrıs Sadarak actually represents the utmost point, the golden age. So as Olof told during this panel, after golden age there is this generations of and the process of corruption. So there was this idea of trying to maybe stop that, and it seems that the solution they tried was to becoming the immortal emperor in Paul's son. So, and also we didn't talk about this actually, but we mentioned the books by Arkady Martin's A Memory Called Empire and Gene Wolf's Book of the New Sun, and in those they actually try something similar to what Paul's son did, this Leto II, the immortal emperor, which is to, so the problem is how to give away the power. So who will get the power after this golden age emperor? So in Arkady Martin's book, A Memory Called Empire, the solution was to clone the emperor. So the emperor repeats itself for many times. So was it cloning or transferring of the mind? I think it was cloning. So in Gene Wolf, there was another solution too. So in that one, the mind of all the old emperors somehow brought together and given to the next emperor. So, and it goes in that way. So the mind of the all empire at the same time confluences at one brain. So there is this, attempts to solution of this break in the cycle in the galactic empire, let's say, science fiction in that way. That's what we can see and maybe say
Also
about.
points out that is an imperial idea. It's not a religion-based.
Maybe not exclusively imperial, but I think imperial parts seems more interesting to me. Maybe that's why I leaned on that part. But
I mean, again, I think it's also interesting here when you consider also differences in Western European Christian historiography and Eastern Christian historiography when you look at the empire, because it's very clear, for instance, in the kind of historiography that Tolkien has been drawing on as a Catholic, it's clear that the empire is gone, but what remains is a kind of a structure that is brought about. Of course, there is no church in his world, but the idea that there is a knowledge that is kept by, in the Western Europe, it would be very much by the monasteries and by the church. They are the kind of the ones who are saving what is remains of the empire. In Orthodox Eastern Byzantine Europe, it's the opposite, because there the monasteries are sometimes places that you withdraw from to turn away from the empire, because you say, no, the empire is actually bad and we are better Christians if we are withdrawing to the desert and living in austerity. That's when we become the pure Christians. So there, I think there's an inbuilt dichotomy also in Western and Eastern Christianity here that has to do with how the empire persisted or not.
Yeah, especially in the late Byzantine eras, especially in the last 100 years, this became more visible, let's say, because in Byzantium, in the ideal Byzantine cosmology, there's one empire, there is one church. So the Orthodoxy, the kingdom of heaven and the empire on earth are the same, and the religion is one and the empire is one. But with the new political realities, let's say, many monks, scholar monks, started writing about the importance of the religion, the orthodoxy, and its supremacy and primacy over the empire. So empire could be really left out, but we should really focus on orthodoxy. These kind of ideas thrived in the later years, and we see historical factual traces of this in especially two occasions when in 1430s the empire, while trying to save itself, they tried to converge back with Catholic Church. So let's gather around and unite Catholicism and Orthodoxy under Catholic supremacy. And the opponents of these are mostly the Orthodox monks, because they were already started writing about let's focus on the Orthodoxy, not the empire. And also the monks in Athos. Athos is the from 10th to 15th century. Actually, today one of the most important monastic centers of Orthodoxy, and it's an important political power in the 15th century. When Thessaloniki was fallen to Venetians and later to Ottomans, they were actually negotiating with Ottomans independently from the imperial powers, the Byzantine powers. So they were in a way backstabbing their own empire, because the importance was to safeguard the church, and even if that means to leave out the empire. And this eschatology and apocalyptic ideas are really important. I mean, because for the monks of 15th century Byzantium, it's really important that they've been really counting on the end of times. They were expecting it to come like 1490, something like that. So they were, at some point, they really came, some of them at least, wrote that, okay, it's coming to an end anyway. Let's focus on orthodoxy, not the empire's survival. So that's important.
Another? I have 2 points. One is your reference to quotation which shows Byzantium in a bad way
Yeah.
from the book.
Okay. Yeah.
Do you think that this is? I think we can differentiate. I think we should differentiate this quotation with what is told here. I think the Byzantine understanding of Dune is not depicted as such in your reference.
I see. You mean? Okay, I couldn't get.
Ben şöyle diyeyim, yani sizin burada ifade ettiğiniz hani kötü tanımlamaya hani genel bir Bizans'ın kötü algılanması gibi yorumlayabilir miyiz? Yani Frank Herbert dünyasında ya da Dune'da.
I mean, I think so. I mean, the Frank Herbert plays with the tropes, but he's really in the convention of, let's say, Gibbon. So Byzantium is a bad thing, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, because Byzantium and Harkonnens are next to each other, and Harkonnen backstabbing, this untrustworthiness, is depicted with, described with Byzantine corruption. So,
I mean, one could of course toy with it. For instance, if we had a history of writing from the Harkonnen perspective, it would look completely different. It's similar to, I can't remember the guy who wrote The Lord of the Rings from the perspective of Mordor, which is, yeah.
I mean, it's
But
90.
this is just I think just a Byzantium. It's an image of Byzantium, not the reality of Byzantium.
Yeah, it's
And
19.
we are not talking about every time about the image, but
We are
reality.
mostly talking about images, by the way.
The reality is always different.
But you're right in a way, because we are in 1960s when Herbert wrote that. So historiography was in these mostly, right?
yeah,
in these veins.
I will come to another point from that. That the theme of Dune, which is an ecological perspective, which is species representing petroleum fuel and the world order. When you come to that point, can you find some resemblance? Can you find some links to? I couldn't find at the moment. I have to think about that more, but we can find, I think.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I guess in this concern, I suppose Herbert is very much a child of his time, and this is, of course, before the oil crisis, but it's still very obvious now where the Western world and the United States are getting most of their fuel from in his time. But I think you could make the argument also when you think about how important the trade was with the East and with the Arab world in the Byzantine Empire. Well, okay, there was one thing, of course, that was that this city largely relied on supply of grain from Egypt. But that's kind of a separate issue. We're not talking about Egypt. But they lose that, of course, after the Arab conquest. And that's the reason why the population here dropped dramatically after the Arab conquests, because you could only have sustain such a huge city in late antiquity as long as you had a flow of grain from Egypt. But then you have, of course, when it comes to spices and when it comes to incense, for instance, then you have a constant trade with Yemen and the Arabia Felix in the Roman and the Byzantine period. So it's still very much associated with the idea about that the empire relies on, of course not for its survival, but it relies on certain very exquisite things that you can only get if you have good trade routes. Where actually it's interesting, you consider the Prophet Muhammad and you put him in his historical context right at the crossroads of the trade between the Byzantine or Roman Empire and Yemen. So.
And it's also, there's this popular belief, and probably it was kind of the mainstream in Herbert's time, that, crusades, I mean, one of the most important reasons for crusades was to reach the spice, black pepper and such. So, it was in Turkish historical books 20 years ago, I suppose. So
there are many things to think about that. I guess. But
Right.
I think, thank you. And we already kept you a lot, so.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for coming,
Üçüncü Berkol Bilim Kurgu Günleri 5-8 Aralık tarihleri arasında Özgen Berkoldoğan Bilim Kurgu Kütüphanesi, Barış Manço Kültür Merkezi, Kadıköy Sineması ve Müze Gazhane'de. Ayrıntılı bilgi için kütüphanenin sosyal medya hesaplarını takip edebilirsiniz.